So today we are going to look at the cardiovascular system and look at first the blood. So blood is made up of about 8% of the total body weight, and in female the total blood volume is about 4 to 5 liters, but for male is about 5 to 6 liters. Blood is a specialized connective tissue in the circulatory system, and it contains specialized cell and cell fragments, and they also contain a solution that contains ions and molecules. So some of the function of the blood include transportation of gas, nutrient, and waste. So two of the most important gas that the blood carries are of course oxygen and carbon dioxide. And blood also can carry or transport processed material such as vitamin D, and they also transport regulatory molecules such as hormones and also enzymes. But it's also important for the regulation of body temperature, blood volume, and osmotic pressure, as well as blood pH. And it's also important to defend your body against infection and foreign substances such as pathogens. And blood is also important for the formation of clot. So the things that form the clots include platelets and clotting factors, which we are going to talk about today. So here is just an overview of the function of the blood again. So blood is formed from formed elements, okay, and also the plasma. And different formed elements are just the cell inside the blood. So there are white blood cell, and platelets, which perform different function, which we are going to talk about. And plasma is the liquid portion of the blood, which contains different electrolyte, proteins, hormone, gases, and nutrient and waste in the water. Okay, so that's the fluid or liquid portion of the blood called the plasma. So let's look at the blood. Let's first look at what is blood and what's the composition of the blood. So again, the blood is a connective tissue. So by definition, connective tissue contains a extracellular matrix. In this case, it's called a plasma, and also cell within the extracellular matrix. And for blood, they are called the formed elements. So plasma, or the liquid portion of the blood, is going to form just roughly 55% of the whole blood. Okay, and then the formed elements, or the cell of the blood, is the rest of the blood, which is 45% of the whole blood. So when you're looking at the plasma, and if you look at the composition of the plasma, majority part of the plasma is just water. So over 90% of your plasma is just water, and then the rest of the composition of the plasma is just dissolved solid, including plasma proteins, iron, nutrients, waste, gases, and hormones. And again, the formed elements are the cells inside the blood. So when you're trying to look at the formed elements, what you find inside those formed elements are the platelets, white blood cell, and also the red blood cell within the blood. So we are going to look at all these components within the blood. So let's look at first the plasma components. So again, in the plasma you have the plasma proteins. The most common proteins that are found in the blood plasma is albumins. So albumin is important for maintaining the viscosity and also the osmotic pressure of the blood, and they are also used for buffering and also to transport fatty acid, bilirubin, and also thyroid hormones. And inside your plasma, there are also proteins called the globulins. They are important for transporting lipids, carbohydrate, hormones, ions, antibodies, and also complement proteins. And the last class of proteins that are found in the plasma are fibrinogen, which we are going to talk about at the end of this chapter, which are involved with clotting process with the blood. So plasma also contains a number of different ions inside. So you find sodium ion, potassium, calcium, magnesium ion, chloride, phosphate, hydrogen hydroxide, and bicarbonate ions. And there are also nutrients inside your plasma as well. They include things such as your glucose, amino acid, vitamins, cholesterol, and triglyceride, which is just a compound formed from fatty acid and glycerol. You can also find waste product inside the plasma, including urea, uric acid, creatine, which you have already learned from the muscle chapter, lactic acid, which is a product from anaerobic respiration. Bilirubin is from the breakdown of red blood cell, and also ammonia salts. In your plasma, you can also find gases. Most important ones are oxygen and carbon dioxide, but you also find nitrogen inside the plasma as well. And again, you will also find hormones and enzymes, which are just regulatory products that are found in the cytoplasma. So, as previously slide mentioned, you will find those globulin proteins that are found inside the plasma, and there are three types of globulin proteins. The alpha globulin proteins are used to inhibit blood protease, so that they will inhibit this enzyme called protease to break down proteins in the blood. And also you find beta globulins, which are important for transport functions. So these globulins will bind to lipid forming lipoproteins, and there are two different forms. So the high density lipoprotein is a good lipoproteins, but there's a bad one called the LDL, which are shown to be related to how much fat you have in the body. So LDL stands for low density lipoproteins, which are the bad ones. And then finally, you also have gamma globulins, which are basically called antibodies, which are part of the body defense against infection, which we are going to focus on later on in this chapter as well. So the formula elements are again the cell within the blood. There are three types of formula elements. So the first type are the red blood cell, which are also called the erythrocyte. So they are used for carrying oxygen and some carbon dioxide around the body. The second type of cell that are found inside the blood are the white blood cell. The white blood cell are also known as the leukocytes, and there are two types of leukocyte or white blood cell. So you can classify this different type of white blood cell by whether they have granules or not inside those cells. So when you find large granules inside those white blood cell, you will classify those white blood cell as granulocyte, granule or granules. Okay, so with granules, then they are granulocyte. Without any granules, then they are called agranulocyte. And there are three types of granulocyte: neutrophil, basophil, and eosinophil. For a granulocyte, the white blood cell that do not have granules, there are two types: lymphocyte and monocyte. So we're going to talk about their function later on. And then finally, the platelets are also known as the thrombocyte. They are not exactly cells, but they are just cell fragments that are involved with clotting, which we are going to talk about later on in this chapter. So let's talk about the production of this cell inside the body. So all of these cell or cell fragments originate from the bone marrow. Okay, so the process of forming this cell or cell fragment are called hematopoiesis, or also hematopoiesis. So the process of forming all this blood cell from the stem cell within the bone marrow is called hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis. Okay, so inside the bone marrow, you find these five types of stem cell. So for red blood cell, they are formed from the proeuroblast. For the granulocyte, which again include the neutrophil, basophil, and eosinophil, they are formed from this cell called myeloblast. Okay, so the second type is myeloblast, which are going to form the neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophil. So again, these three types are granulocyte. And then the third type is the lymphocyte, which are formed from the lymphoblast. And then the monocyte is formed from the monoblast. So the monoblast will form the monocyte, lymphoblast will form the lymphocyte, and monocyte and lymphocyte are types of a granulocyte. Okay, and then finally the platelets again are just cell fragments from a bigger cell called megakaryocyte. So when this cell break down into fragments, they becomes these fragments called the platelets. And the megakaryocyte is originally comes from a stem cell called a megakaryoblast. So all of these cells are formed within the bone marrow.